Welcome to Dr. B Music Theory. I had a recent question from Opiekun DPS who asked me to analyze a piece of music they really liked. It was a piece by Erik Satie, written in 1890. And this is a great question that I'm really glad was asked, is the idea to analyze a specific piece. The best way to learn about how music works is examine the music written by people, great composers, whose music worked. Learn by going straight to the source. Now, the music theory skills that we have learned along the way are going to make this a little bit easier for us. So let's get involved with what this would be. Erik Satie, French composer, late 19th century. This was a time period in Western music history where composers were starting to look back at medieval music for some inspiration. And if you go back to medieval music, theoretically, they're using modes, and it was called modal music. There was a bit of influence. It was a time where France and Russia had a kind of musical exchange of influences. So you have Mussorgsky in Russia having his music orchestrated by Maurice Ravel in France. And the Russians still had a good amount of the modal influences. That's specifically in terms of melody, modal influences on the melody. And this is something Erik Satie explores in this piece. So what I want to do is I want to talk about first the form of this piece of music. Form is often relegated to a distant second cousin in terms of importance of music. But I really find that form is so important. The idea behind form being that you, as a composer writes something, has a musical idea that they write down. The listener hears it. At the end of that musical idea, the composer has to either repeat something old or do something new. And you run risks. If you always repeat the old stuff, you run the risk of being so repetitive that it becomes boring for the listener. And on the other side, if you're always giving something new, you run the risk of losing your audience, losing the listener. They get confused first, and then they get bored because they're confused. So finding that balance between enough repetition so that there's a familiarity, there's an ability for the listener to follow what's happening in the music, and enough repetition, so enough of that repetition for that, and enough new material to give it variety and interest. So Erik Satie starts off with a 9-measure idea that he does 2 times. So this is what we call our A section, what I'm calling our A section. 9 measures twice. Now, you might be saying, Dr. B, measures, what are you talking about? There's no bar lines in this piece. And it was published in this edition without bar lines. No measures. So what am I talking about? Well, in this particular piece, you have this whole note that's played every 4 beats. If we pretend this is 4/4, common time, we have a whole note in the bass every 4 beats. It's often played with a steady pulse. So this is essentially 4/4 common time. Now, you will then ask me, well, why would Satie not just write it in 4/4? And there are editions of this music that are indicated with bar lines. So keep in mind, when I talk about editions, someone has to print and publish this music. So Peters there's a publishing company that has it. This was the version that I'm using right now is a 1913 edition publication of that work. But there's some well-respected publications from later on that use the bar lines. Maybe because it's simpler for the average performer to read it that way. But why would Satie write it without the bar lines? Well, in part, it goes back to that modal idea where a lot of modal music did not have the metric structures that we are familiar with today. They might not have had bar lines. And so the performer of today, looking at this music, might use that as an opportunity to have a broader feeling, a more sense of stasis in the piece, as opposed to a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 metric feel to it. It might float some more, which makes a lot of sense with modal music. Modal music harmonically is in one place for a long, long time. This entire piece is in F minor. It's F minor. There's so many F minor chords. It's almost everything else. The other chords are just minor in comparison. Minor in the sense that there's not as many of them. But when you do change, it's really dramatic. So in this piece, if you listen to just the first part, we basically have this F minor chord. And then we move to C minor. And that C minor is really interesting after having F minor for so long. And you'll ask again, C minor, but in a minor key, don't you raise the leading tone? Well, you're right if we're talking about major minor tonality music, which happened in the Baroque era, happened in the 17th century, much later than the Middle Ages, that this is kind of drawing some inspiration and influence from. So it makes sense that Satie stays within the F minor mode, stays within the mode of F minor, and does not raise the leading tone, does not make that E flat and E natural. And then it goes back to the F minor right after that to finish up our phrase. And it's a 9-measure phrase that he repeats twice. Now, the chords alone, there is nothing unusual about that. There's nothing worthy of further explanation. The interest really comes from what Satie does with the melody, because he doesn't just use your standard F minor scale. He doesn't even use the standard F Aeolian scale in this section. He uses what I would call F Dorian sharp 4. So it's a Dorian scale, F, G, A flat. Normally you would have a B flat in the Dorian mode, but it becomes a B natural here, C, D, E flat, which is the rest of the Dorian scale as expected. So we have one big change. The B flat becomes a B natural, a augmented fourth interval, a sharp 4 or raised fourth. There's another way you could think about this scale. It is also the mode, a mode, of the harmonic minor scale. So I'll give you all a second to either pause the video or think very quickly and figure out and tell me what mode of what harmonic minor scale is this. If you come up with, the answer is C harmonic minor scale, making this the 4th mode of the C harmonic minor scale. So, modes. It's really, really interesting. And so let's listen to that opening 9 measures and listen to the very traditional F minor chord, the slightly untraditional minor 5 chord, which is not expected, and a very untraditional melody that emphasizes the D natural, and if and the key signature has the D flat, but there's D naturals all over the place for this first thing, and the B natural. So that those two notes are really, really defining and what give it this very evocative sound and emotion in this beginning. Those dissonances, those unexpected sounds, unexpected relationships. The traditional F minor triad with the untraditional B natural, D natural going against that. that's our first 9 measures. And how interesting is it? How it has that feeling of it just kind of floats, but you still have this motion that the repetitive of with the repetitive accompaniment with the bass chord, chord, bass chord, chord, and then this melody that kind of floats on top of that, using this unusual mode. Now, after so much F minor with a brief deviation into the minor 5 chord, we go to our B section. Our B section is only 4 measures in length. It's repeated twice, just like the 9 measures before, but it shifts modes. Obviously, it goes to a minor 4 chord, which is a B flat minor triad. So A minor is the A section is primarily F minor. Then you have this prominent B flat minor at the beginning of the B section that then moves back to the F minor. After the prominence of the B naturals and the D naturals, that B flat minor chord is so impactful, right? So how interesting that Satie uses a very traditional relationship, F minor to B flat minor, 1 to 4. Nothing all that innovative with that, but because his melody in the A section emphasized that B natural and D natural, when he shifts to that 4 chord, it's incredibly striking. And you can hear that it goes. The B flat is very low in the register, and you can look at and you can say, well, you have the starts with the B flat that we hear in the melody, and so that G natural is probably most easily analyzed as a 2 half diminished 6/5. 4 going to 2 is very common, so 4 to 2 half diminished 6/5. Back to 4, back to 2 half diminished 6/5, and then back to 1. It's really a 4 area, and the 2 half diminished 6/5, maybe I'd put that in parentheses. Maybe I would call it a 4 chord going to a 4, minor 4 chord, add 6. That might be another way you could look at it. So certainly we could have, I would be open to debate whether it's a B flat minor to B flat minor 6, meaning adding that G natural, or whether that is B flat minor going to G half diminished 7 over B flat. Either analysis makes sense. Here, Satie is firmly in the Aeolian mode. This is what the key signature indicates. This is the most traditional. And so here he kind of goes into the expected, or at least the more expected. We then move forward to a C section. Something different. It's still in F minor, and for a while when I was trying to analyze this, I wrestled whether I would consider this a C or a variation of A. When you come back to that F minor, the F minor is just so dominant as a sonority, it feels like you're kind of coming back to the beginning, but there's enough melodically that is different, and the mode implied is different enough, at least that I really thought that this deserved to be a different C section, and so I called that C. And here I analyzed this beginning as an F ascending melodic minor sharp 4. So that scale, F, G, A flat, B, C, D, E, F. This still sounds minor because we're using that F minor triad in the accompaniment, and we have this ascending melodic minor scale that is so unique. And so he's again kind of taking these modes, scales that are common, and he's modifying them. He's kind of inventing new ones. He might be borrowing old ones, but he's also changing them. What's interesting is that as he descends the scale, descends from that opening figure, he ends up using something that's somewhat reminiscent of the Hungarian minor. So Hungarian minor would be F, G, A flat, B, C, D flat, E. Would sound like. So the really interesting notes would be that you have a B natural and an E natural. Now that B natural reminds us of the beginning, and you'll notice that you have the B natural in both this A section and the C section. But we now have E natural instead of E flats like we had in the opening section. There's no point where you have that minor 5 chord with the E flat featured in it. We now have E naturals. So let's hear what this section sounds like. So that's really interesting. I think most of the times when you deal with grace notes, they're embellishments of the melodic line. But here, when we have this D flat grace note, I find it really, really interesting and really important. We have this beginning of the C section where you have the D natural. Natural featured prominently there. Then here, that D flat kind of shifts us back into the darker minor that we expect. Then you get the B natural, that sharp 4 that's so prominent in this piece. And then we kind of wind down, finishing up on tonic in our melody. That's 6 measures. It's repeated. So you'll see the structure of this within each section. It's like a binary form. He repeats everything. So we have A, B, C. Satie then goes back to the B, the minor 4 chord, B flat minor, going back to F minor. In a certain sense, that could be considered one giant section. Because after that, we go back to A. We go back to that original material. However, I call it A prime because it's only the first half of our A section. It's only 4 measures long. It's repeated, but it brings us back to where we started. But notice the melody is a whole note now. It's not as articulated. We repeat it. Again, a whole note instead of a half note like before. To our B. So we have our A abbreviated. And then you'll notice A, B, C, B. So we have 2 large sections. It's almost like another big, large binary. So we could say on the meta level, A, A. we do it again. We're repeating all those sections. The only thing that's worth really noting that's a little bit different is that our final B feels a little incomplete. It's 4 measures. It repeats 3 of those measures, but not the 4th measure. And in a certain sense, that's not a big deal because that last part can just be sustained. So normally we have one more bass chord to end it out. Satie cuts that out, kind of gives it a feeling of being slightly unresolved. All those things go together to really create the unique emotion of this piece. So I hope that gave you a whole bunch of insight how we can use these tools that we've discussed to examine and see how a piece of music is working. I hope that makes you appreciate it more. And I would urge you to try to utilize some of these principles and see if you can do something like that. See if you can take a very simple harmonic structure, take a scale, a regular scale, and modify it. Here, F Dorian sharp 4, F Aeolian, F ascending melodic minor sharp 4, F Hungarian minor. See what you can do. Try to do something in major and see what you could do. Maybe following this same idea. F Ionian sharp 4, or which you would call Lydian. Back to regular Ionian, then maybe you shift in another direction. But see if you can experiment with that. See how this B natural and D natural become B flat and D flat, and then how the B natural stays, the D natural stays, but the E flat becomes an E natural here. It stays here, but this D then becomes a D flat, and we shift there. So we kind of have all these kind of permutations of what is happening. But it might also be worth noting what stays, right? It is always F, G, A flat, C. It's the 4th scale degree that gets modified between B flat and B natural, the 6th scale degree between D and D flat, and the 7th scale degree between E and E flat. That's kind of cool. That's kind of interesting. What can you do? What foundation can you choose and modify some of those other notes that give you different modes, different feelings, different moods, and see how you can kind of make it all hold together.